my name is Joni, and today we're going to go through the list. So the list is something that I developed to help people to better understand themselves so that they can have a clearer picture of what it is that they're looking for in a healthy relationship. Now, this was actually a tool that I developed for people who are seeking a relationship. However, it can be used for couples as well, or those, of course, who are in committed relationships. I established a couple of categories. They're very, very basic, but I encourage you to create your own categories and be as comprehensive as you can. So the reason I created this tool is because oftentimes we are constantly preparing for things, whether it's an exam at school or a presentation at work. We invest the time to attain the most effective and desired result. However, I noticed that when we think about relationships, we tend to be very, very whimsical or passive about it. I've heard things like, oh, well, when the time is right, it'll just happen. You know, soulmates will just find each other. And that's all well and good, but I do encourage people to take some time with it, to better understand themselves and better understand what it is that they're looking for and why. So, the different categories that I started out with are personality, energy level, communication style, lifestyle, and goals. So again, I do encourage people to be as specific as possible. And I will give you an example. I did this many years ago. I realized that I'm a night person, and over the years and a lot of life experience later, I determined that I really can't live with a morning person, or at least at this stage in my life. Because a morning person and a night person doesn't necessarily refer to the time that you go to bed as much as it does when do you have the most energy? At what point during the day are you the most creative, energetic, think the most clearly? So I found that if I wasn't with a night person, it just made things a little bit more complicated. So again, it doesn't seem like it's significant, but I do implore you to think about all these different things about your life in these various categories, and certainly ones that you'll come up with on your own, so that you'll have a better understanding of, all right, this is who I am, this is how I live my life, and this is what I need to attract so that, I find the person who's best suited for me. So we'll start out with personality. Introvert versus extrovert. Now, for most of us, the first time we heard these terms are really through the Myers-Briggs. And I have a similarity in definitions of introvert versus extrovert. However, there's an emotional outspoken and enjoys being around a lot of people. And that's a fantastic and baseline definition. However, when you add the emotional component, it helps you to define who you are and who it is that you want to be looking for. So we'll take an example. Let's say there's a couple and the husband is an introvert and the wife is an extrovert. How that might come into play is introverts tend to process internally. They tend to be more drained from dealing with a lot of people. Extroverts, on the other hand, get their energy from other people, and they tend to process externally, meaning when they're confronted with an issue, they will seek external advice, opinions before making a decision, whereas introverts tend to be more self-contained, a lot more thoughtful. They will tend to process internally in terms of resolving the issue in their head and even coming up with a solution on their own. So the husband is coming home from work, he's had a long day, she has as well. Oftentimes you'll have the introvert, when they come through the front door, they need time to process. They need time to decompress, take a moment to feel, grounded again. I know of a couple where there's a rule that they've created so that the first 15 to 30 minutes, the husband has an opportunity to decompress, do whatever he needs to do, maybe take a shower, just sit down, watch TV for a moment, but just kind of get back to center. Whereas the wife, who's an extrovert, typically wants to talk about her day immediately as soon as the husband walks through the front door. However, because there is an establishment of recognition that one is an introvert and one is an extrovert, and they have different needs emotionally, this is something that has really helped them. She respects the fact that he needs time, and he understands that once he's had that time to decompress, that he is much more able to focus on his wife and their communication together, making it much more meaningful. So that's introversion versus extroversion. Independent versus dependent. This is in regards to how you tend to process information and resolve problems. Independent people tend to be much more self-contained and process that information or issues or problems internally. Meaning, again, they're not going to elicit opinions from outside sources. Dependent people tend to be the opposite. They are the first to, when confronted with issues, call their friends, their support network, talk about the situation and kind of create a solution jointly after getting opinions from multiple people. Controlling versus passive. I think that, this is probably fairly self-explanatory, but it really depends on the degree and where you both fall on the continuum. Generally speaking, in relationships, you don't have someone who's controlling 100% of the time and someone who's much more passive 100% of the time. Oftentimes, in certain situations, you'll have someone who's maybe a little more experienced, take control of the situation, and the other person might be passive. In other situations, it might be the opposite. So again, determining controlling versus passive is part of an exercise to determine where you fall on the continuum. And more importantly, what you are and are not willing to deal with. If you're someone who's very independent and doesn't like to be told what to do and doesn't like a lot of rules, then you need to identify that about yourself and understand that you're probably not going to have a successful relationship with someone who has a strong need to control situations. Again, there's no right or wrong. It's a matter of who you are and who you need to find in your life to complement you and what you are and are not willing to deal with. Fixed versus flexible. Well, generally speaking, someone who is fixed, and this pertains to how somebody views the world. Someone who's fixed tends to be more black and white, adhere more to social mores, established thoughts and protocols. Someone who's flexible tends to see things as more on the gray side, who is more adept at melding themselves into situations and being very flexible about it in terms of being open-minded. This also relates to how comfortable do you feel in your own skin. It's not a matter of right and wrong, being fixed or flexible, but to identify, where do I fall in the continuum? Are you very, very fixed in certain aspects of your life, but more flexible in others? And if so, you might want to either find someone of like mind, or at least be aware that these are what your boundaries are, this is who you are, and this is what you're looking for. So I put down emotional maturity. That can be very subjective, and it really depends on where you are in your life and certainly what age group that you fall into. It has to do with how you interact with the rest of the world. So are you someone who is a raw emotion, or are you someone who's able to kind of step back and analyze and assess the situation? It does pertain to level of groundedness versus defensiveness. And this pertains to an ability for growth. So you might think of yourself at that stage in your life where emotional maturity is very, very important. I think that the younger we are, the less important it tends to be. The older we get, the more significant emotional maturity tends to play in terms of significance in the relationship. And again, it's just a matter of identifying and figuring out where you fall in the continuum of these things. The second category is energy level. So I put high versus low. An example would be, let's say you have a couple and the husband is more low energy, the wife is a little more high energy. The way that this plays out in a relationship is, it certainly pertains to emotional needs as it pertains to energy levels. Example would be, both husband and wife have had, the normal 40 to 60 hour a week. On the weekends, the wife tends to want to play tennis and golf, go hiking, and be out and about. That's what rejuvenates her, and that's what gives her energy. Whereas the husband might want to just relax, kind of be chill, watch a football game, maybe do some gardening, but much more leisure activities. Again, there are always compromises that can be reached, and it really depends on the willingness of the two individuals in the relationship. But as long as you can identify what the differences are and identify what the issues may be, then you can always come to some kind of resolution. These exercises, again, are designed to determine, where you fall in the continuum and what you are and are not willing to deal with. So if you're a low energy person and you're with or attracted to a high energy person, that's not a bad thing. It can motivate both to be the opposite, but it can certainly be workable. The couple that I'm referring to, on Saturdays, they'll go out and do more activities. They might both, play golf or go to an art and wine festival or do something outdoors that makes her happy. And on Sundays, they might stay at home and watch a movie or do some leisurely activities together. Again, no right or wrong, it's just an acknowledgement of who you are and an identification of what your needs are. The third category is communication styles. So I feel that there have been a lot of books and videos and a lot of information that goes over how couples and people communicate with one another in relationships. So I'm not going to go into a lot of specifics, but I do think there are a couple of points that are important. So I'll address a few issues. How do you communicate with the outside world? So one thing that I found interesting is, how do people communicate with wait staff in a restaurant? This can actually be kind of telling, because when we're, dating, we tend to want to put forward our best face. We are on our best behavior and we're there to impress. But when you sit back and observe, it's important to see, how does this person deal with the waiter? Are they respectful and courteous, or are they belligerent and, kind of have an attitude of servitude versus, I'm the customer and I'm always right? And depending on how you are, that can be very telling. Also, how does this person communicate with his friends and family? Family is especially important, and that's actually a separate video because that could be extremely important in a relationship. Self-disclosure. This really addresses how comfortable people feel disclosing and talking about their emotions and their feelings. So if you're a person who wants a lot of self-disclosure, someone who's more dependent on others in terms of constant feedback and validation, then that's great. Just recognize that in yourself so that you're not looking for someone who feels extremely uncomfortable self-disclosing. Oftentimes when it comes to self-disclosure, opposites aren't necessarily the best situation. I've found that to kind of private introverted people do better with each other than, and to open book individuals tend to do better with one another than opposites. Just because I think that it's very, very difficult to change people, to make someone who's very comfortable with self-disclosure not be, or someone who's not comfortable with self-disclosure to push them into being more so. Because it has to do with someone's comfort level. And that will generally have been formulated over the course of decades. So having an expectation that someone will change isn't necessarily realistic. So lifestyle, someone who's active versus someone who's a homebody. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. Again, no right or wrong. It's just a matter of identifying which one of these you are and looking for someone who is of like mind. Because oftentimes, if someone who is extremely active and always wants to be out is attracted and trying to have a successful relationship with someone who's very, very much of a homebody and feels uncomfortable in a lot of social situations, then there are going to be problems down the road. How does that person look at life in terms of work and their careers and their free time and spending money? Those are all different facets of a relationship that are very significant once the relationship is well established. So when you're looking for someone, at least have an idea of what level of commitment do you have to your work, and what are you looking for in another person? Because if you look at work as a means to the end, and yet you're attracted to someone who's extremely focused on their career, you might find yourself being kind of playing second fiddle to a career and career goals and aspirations, and resentment might play a role in later on in the relationship. How do people spend their free time? That can be very telling because it tells you what their priorities are. Someone who's spending their free time reading books, doing more solitary activities, watching a movie, reading a book, hobbies that might be just them and themselves, as opposed to someone who wants to spend their free time with other people. Again, no right or wrong, just a means of identification and understanding. And what brings you joy? Now, this is actually a difficult question to answer because we don't think about it that often. But I think it's important to ask yourself, as well as the other person, what is it that brings you joy? I'll give you an example. I find joy in the little things. And when I was walking downtown doing an errand one day, I came across an elderly couple, and the husband was trying to help the wife put her jacket on, and she kept missing the sleeve. And I could see that they were having some problems. So I stopped and I asked them if I could help. I took the jacket and I helped guide the wife's hand into the arm sleeve and put her jacket on. It took all of 10 to 15 seconds, but they thanked me. And I felt very grateful that I was there at that time, that moment in time, to assist them. And it was a wonderful exchange. It brought me a tremendous amount of joy that I felt that, I could be there to help. So, important questions, not easy to answer, but it gives you an idea and it'll make you stop and think about your life. So, the last category is goals. And this is important, especially as it pertains to family and children. So if you're someone who has a goal of meeting someone with the idea that you want to get married and have a family, then it's very, very important to find out what that other person, where they're coming from. Do they have similar goals? Or do they have the attitude that I'm not at that point in my life, I'm really not looking for a serious relationship? Oftentimes we make the mistake of assuming that, well, this person might feel this way now. However, I'm sure that after, dating for a while, they'll change their minds. More often than not, people know where they are in their lives. And I am someone who I do take people at their word and at face value. So if someone tells me that they're not interested in a serious relationship, and yet I am, I'm not going to waste my time. You know, they're at a point in their lives where they're not ready, and they're certainly entitled to be at that point. But if I am ready, then I don't, why waste your time and someone else's? Because again, it's not that easy to change someone, nor is it healthy to go into a relationship thinking that you are going to change someone or that you want to. Because more often than not, it will develop into a very resentful situation and heartache. A lot of headache, frustration, and heartache. Career, it's important, I think, for people to at least have an idea and understanding of where that person sees themselves 5 to 10 years down the road. Because if they really do have an expectation of climbing the corporate ladder and doing whatever it takes to make that happen, they may not be ready for a relationship that's highly committed and deeply meaningful, if at all, because oftentimes it's pretty hard to have both. Certainly when it comes to someone who is really focused on their career. And I come from Silicon Valley, and I'm very, very used to that. And when people are focused on their careers, it means that they're working 60 or more hours a week. And they're doing whatever it takes. And when they get home, they might be on conference calls at 3 a.m. So if you are either that kind of person or you are interested in a person who leads that kind of lifestyle, then you have to be at least self-aware enough to ask yourself, is that something that I can deal with? Retirement. Now, most of you aren't going to ever think about this subject for quite some time. But for those of us who are middle-aged and are possibly, seeking a relationship, this is important, because how someone views retirement and their expectations of retirement are very important. Because if someone has an attitude that I'm going to do all the things that I didn't do when I was working and raising kids, and I want to travel and I want to go and do this and do that, that's great. But if you're with someone or seeking someone or interested in someone who just wants to relax and pursue leisurely activities, maybe play a couple rounds of golf a week, but just really low key, then that can be problematic. Of course, there are always ways of making things work. It could be a matter of, all right, well, you can be leisurely, but once a month, we're going to go out and do some activities. We're going to do something, travel related or activity related. So again, no right or wrong. It's just a matter of identifying where you fall on the spectrum and who would be the best person suited for you given what you've identified. So I hope this helps. I encourage you again to be as specific as possible. Relationships are tough, and they require a tremendous amount of focus and self-awareness and investment of time. I wish you a lot of luck. Don't get discouraged. This exercise hopefully will be of assistance to you, if for no other reason, self-awareness. I hope that you find this to be helpful, and best of luck. Take care.